Hello, everybody, and welcome to Crash Zoom. I'm Sammie Purcell, Associate Editor with Rough Draft Atlanta, and I'm here as always with indie filmmaker Aaron Strand. How you doing today, Aaron?
I am doing all right, Sammie. It is a gloomy Monday here in Atlanta, Georgia. It's really getting to me. I'm dragging, so I'm trying to summon up the energy. I'm trying to summon up these takes for this show today. We'll see what happens.
I have faith. I feel like you always have takes, so I think today will prove to be similar. But if it's your first time listening to Crash Zoom, we welcome you. Thank you so much for being here. If you've never listened to Crash Zoom before, what Aaron and I like to do here is take a look at what's going on in the industry, in the film industry, at a higher level and try to boil down why that matters to independent filmmakers. If you listen today and you like what you hear, please hit that subscribe button. You can listen to us on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also watch us on YouTube at Crash Zoom Podcast. And be sure to rate and review as well. That really helps us out. But before we get into the news this week, I have a question for you, Aaron. What have you been watching lately?
Well, as is becoming a frequent refrain, not a whole lot. Managing two podcasts, a feature film, a normal job, and a 3-year-old is eating into my film watching time. I did get a chance. Though. I rewatched The Warriors in preparation for the live show that I've got coming up on March 27th. So I'm able to spin this into a plug. So I was able to rewatch The Warriors. I watched the awful Walter Hill director's cut. Or the final director's cut that he did about 10 years ago, where they put these like stupid comic book like transitions into the movie that just absolutely didn't need to be there. Absolutely peak unnecessary director's cut behavior from Walter Hill, which is a real shame. But I was also able to go. Luckily, what is on Paramount Plus is the original non-director's cut. Rewatch The Warriors, cool. And it hits. It's so good. Yeah, it slaps, it slays, whatever people younger than me are saying. And I'm reading a fabulous book called Can You Dig It, which is like really, the author really goes in deep about the making of this film. So I'm getting lots of good info to put into my little intro over at the Plaza on March 27th. So if you are here in Atlanta, Georgia, you want to come see The Warriors on a very rare 35 millimeter print that we got from Paramount, come out to the Plaza Theater. It's going to be awesome.
Awesome. I have not been watching The Warriors, but I'm excited to see that once again. I haven't seen it in a long time. But I've been watching a couple of things, some old, some new. I recently watched Snack Shack, which came out last year. It's from Adam Carter. I think you say his last name, Remier. I think that's how you say it. But it's probably the most nostalgic I felt watching a movie in some time. It's about a couple of rising high school freshmen in the 90s. They're played by Gabriel LaBelle, who in the same year played a rising high school freshman, and Lorne Michaels, which like age range on that kid, I guess. And Connor Sherry is the other actor who stars in it. And they basically take over their local pool snack shack for the summer to make some money. It's like very 90s, very nostalgic, really fun, like just an utter delight. Both of the actors are wonderful. There's obviously a girl. It's great. There's like a cool older brother type. It's got every kind of like little, what's it called? What are those called? Archetypes. There we go. Lost a word. Yeah. It's got every archetype you could possibly want from that type of movie, and it's really well done. It was just a really easy watch, really, really fun.
That's cool. I remember seeing the trailer for that when it came, or about a year ago.
I don't think it did very well, which is a real shame, because I think it's one of those movies I watch and I'm kind of like, I think everyone I know would enjoy this.
What prompted you to watch it?
I was actually listening to The Big Picture, another podcast, and the host of that podcast, Sean Fennessy, has been really kind of big on it for some time. And he had just started talking about it again. And I was like, I should check that out. I like Gabriel LaBelle. I think he's like a fun young actor that's come out in the past few years. And it was a lot of fun. It was just a great little watch.
Very cool.
And then on the other hand, I watched Tea and Sympathy recently. Very hard turn. It's a Vincent Minnelli movie starring Deborah Kerr, John Kerr, and Leif Erikson. whoa, said his name very funny, Leif Erikson. There we go. And it was just wonderful. It's a melodrama, and for a movie made in 1956, it's a pretty amazing takedown on homophobia, particularly given that it's the middle of the Hays Code and they couldn't even say the words, but you still get it. It's just wonderful. I love watching Minnelli's non-musical movies. It's just like he's a really wonderful director. It was really great. All right, well, let's get started with some news items this week. So, first, we're not done talking about the Oscars. You thought we were. We're not, because the Oscars ratings went up. Angels, choir, cue the angels singing. So most of this information I got from a Vulture article by Alejandra Gularte. So this Oscars telecast was the most watched telecast since 2020. So since the COVID pandemic started.
How up did they go, Sammie?
So the award show viewership went up by 3%,
wow,
with a 3.92 rating among adults ages 18 through 49, which is the highest rating for that category in 2 years.
Yeah,
so it's not that much, but
it's not keeping pace with inflation. Let's just put it that way.
No, but it's it's interesting because we talked about this last episode or a couple episodes ago, but this is the first time that the Oscars. It does. Streamed simultaneously on Hulu. So they were live on ABC and then also were streaming at the same time on Hulu. I don't know if there's really any way to draw a direct correlation to these numbers from that decision. What do you think? I don't really know how you would do that, but I'm also not well versed in stuff like this.
So the Nielsen data came out, and this is why it was sort of delayed. So initially ABC put out their numbers, which were under the total from last year, about 1 million under. So last year around 19 million people watched it when it was only on linear television. This year ABC came out and reported, well, we had 18 million viewers. Or 18.5, something like that. It was like a small decrease. But it took a few days for Nielsen, which, as we know, is only recently being able to put together real data on these streaming numbers. And if you want to find out how they do that, go listen to the last week's episode of The Town with Matt Bellany. He had on a person from Nielsen where they describe in detail how they do this. It is absolutely fascinating. Everything from embedded secret audio codes that are in the linear television broadcast that are being monitored by their Nielsen partner families to how they are monitoring people's screen or computer and mobile viewing habits. Absolutely amazing stuff, and really gave me a lot more confidence sort of in the Nielsen numbers. And it was only after this few days after the Nielsen data came out that showed this modest uptick in viewership.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned this last time we spoke, but your Hulu stream didn't work. And apparently that's a big problem for a lot of people. I did not have that problem. I guess we were very lucky. I don't know if it's because of where we were or what. But apparently the stream cut out right before they were about to announce Best Oscar. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, so basically a classic situation where the programming department at Hulu and the technician department at Hulu were not communicating because no one communicated that, hey, by the way, the Oscars always goes over its telecast. So the Hulu people had bracketed 3 hours to stream the Oscars. So the second that the broadcast went over 3 hours, it just cut out for a vast majority of people. I was never even so lucky to experience that horror because it never worked for me from the get-go.
To begin with.
Some Hulu customers just, the stream was just broken from the get-go, from the very start, and that was me. So Hulu never worked for me. And but classic kind of first time with a live event for a network like this, streamer like this.
And I do think, and the Vulture article sort of mentions this too, that perhaps there's no way to make a concrete correlation between the fact that it was streaming on Hulu and the ratings jump, but it could be possible that Hulu allowing viewers to stream the show made it more accessible, particularly to that sort of key demographic that doesn't really have a cable subscription. But I wonder if the problems this year will discourage people from trying it next year, or how that'll all kind of shake out. If I don't know if it'll be better or what, I
don't know. I think that unfortunately we as a customer base have all been conditioned to these early these streamer attempts at
Oh,
live
yeah.
television, and just understanding
The
that this is
Netflix Love Is Blind live finale comes to mind.
oh, of course, who could forget? Who could
It
forget
was
me
awful.
sobbing in my living room? Where is it? Where is Love Is Blind?
Not
Um,
sobbing, I'm just annoyed. This is y'all's job. Get it together.
Oh, I totally agree. I totally,
Yeah.
totally agree. But I think we all know it will be better next year. We're glad they're doing it. But
Mhm.
I think the correlating factor to the streaming numbers providing this bump was that this article goes on to describe that the viewership was up 19% for adults under the age of 50, which is a
Mhm.
huge uptick. And for adults under the age of 34, it was up 28%. So a huge amount of younger viewers were tuning in, and I think Hulu has a part of that. But what do you think is the other part of the young person draw?
Well, we've sort of, I think, lightly touched on this in the past. I do think there is just sort of like a growing interest among young people in film. And I don't know like whether that has to do with like I feel like in the past few years there's been kind of an uptick in like repertory screenings at theaters and like kind of eventizing going to see old movies. And the Oscars obviously is an event, but I think like there's just been sort of an there's been a more, especially since the pandemic kind of made everything so isolated, right? I think there's been an uptick in this sort of eventizing and making like an event around going to see a movie, particularly like an older movie, which maybe feels like a little more special. Maybe it's like the Warriors 35 millimeter, like, you know what I mean? It's just something that's a little more special.
March 27th.
And there you go. And people just want to get out and go. And even I think like even Letterbox like adds like a communal like
Yes,
sort of
thank
feeling to
you.
it, you know? Like
Yes,
yeah.
I am so glad you said that because I could not agree more. And article
Mhm.
after article that I have read about this ratings bump among younger people is just is they look like such idiots. They're looking around going, "Is it Timothy Chalamet? Are people so excited about Ariana
Well,
Grande? Oh, are these just like
yeah.
Conan fans because Conan appeals to younger people?" And I'm not saying that those things are not a part of the package. But there's been all this hand wringing about, oh my God, Meryl Streep wasn't front row. Oh my God, Jack Nicholson is too senile to make it to the Oscars. Like what's going on? Guys, this ratings bump is coming from the cinephile letterbox crowd. Like these are the people who are tuning in. These are the people who care about the Brutalist versus Anora. And it's more interesting to see who is going to win as opposed to, oh, Oppenheimer is just going to sweep it. I mean, all the dooms, there was so much talk going into the Oscars of like, there's no way that it can beat Barbenheimer. The Barbenheimer year was so special. What was special about it? We knew Oppenheimer was going to sweep. There was nothing interesting about it. And even that like does not appeal to the same sort of the cinephile girlies, the cinephile boys, like getting out their letterbox, checking their stars, like who seeing how many all five people that liked their reviews. Okay, that's
Yeah.
the people who tuned in and made this Oscars
Called out.
the most. No, I'm one of them. I am a part
I
of this.
know.
But
Yeah.
like, I mean, come on, don't you agree?
I know. I agree. I do think there's something to be said and it's an interesting fact about all of this because I also constantly, you know, I think when people are sort of hand wringing about like, oh, how do we make the Oscars like relatable to a younger crowd? And their heads immediately go to younger stars. And I do think there is something to be said about like, you know, to use Harry Styles as an example. If you put Harry Styles in a movie, like Don't Worry Darling is going to do well. And if Harry Styles were at the Oscars, you get a whole bunch of fans tuning in to watch, right? And I do think there is something to be said for that argument. I don't want to talk about Don't Worry Darling any more than using that as an example.
Remember when we thought he spit on Chris Pine? He looks like he
That was
spit on Chris
actually
Pine.
that was the best day of my life. That was so funny. But that whole Venice press tour, wow, that was true art, honestly. But I do think there is something to be said for like perhaps if we have this really young, really hot, famous person with a bunch of Instagram followers with a huge, very dedicated following, that following will tune in. But I do think for those people who are only tuning in for one factor, like they're more likely to tune out really quickly. Like in order to kind of build up a dedicated rising fan base, it's exactly what you're saying. Like, it's people who are actually interested in the movies that are being presented to them beyond, having Ariana Grande sing Wicked songs at the beginning, which, like, she's great. I love Ariana Grande. I have no qualms. But I do think, like, if you want to build up that more dedicated fan base, you have to move past just like, I like Timothée Chalamet, I will watch because he's there.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I think there was way more. I just think there was way more. And I mean, when I say way more, there was exactly 3% more.
Not way more. Yeah.
Yeah, there was 3% more excitement in the building. But even just looking around, like at some of the events that were happening here in Atlanta, I mean, I had friends,
Hmm.
throwing Oscar watch parties at that, like you paid a ticket to go to that were like out,
Wow. Yeah.
at like at a club. And these places like sold out, like the tables were full, like people wanted to go
Hmm.
see it. And this is the mid-20s cinephile crowd that is showing out for this kind of stuff. And I'm just baffled that everything that I read coming from the industry seems blind to this.
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder if, like, I'm sympathetic to, like, having to get an article out really quickly. I wonder if, like, in the coming weeks or so, there'll be like more deep dives kind of on this sort of thing. And people have, not to say that people haven't written about like the rise of Letterboxd in the past, but I would be interested to sort of read something that like really actively tries to like really quantify that leap, I guess, which is hard to do. It takes a
Sam,
while, but
Sammy, I think this
yeah.
sounds like a great article idea for you.
Oh my gosh, I'm so busy.
Oh, come on. This is a scoop. This is a scoop.
I know.
I mean, I would love to give the benefit of the doubt, but I think honestly, everybody's moving on. Everybody's at South by talking about, the fact that
That's the other thing. Things move so quickly.
no
Like,
studios have
yeah.
booths at South by. Oh my God. So,
No, I know.
everything has just moved on. And I don't think anybody's taking a moment to reflect on what is actually working and what could go
Yeah.
right. And that is frustrating. I mean, we harp on the negative stuff all the time on this show, but the
Hmm.
Oscars as a whole was a win. And I would love for people to actually put their finger on the pulse, because I do think that that's where the future of this art form is going.
Yeah. Maybe I'll interview a bunch of. You got my gears turning. We'll see what happens.
Nice. Everyone subscribe to Sammy's Substack.
And scene by Rough Draft. All right, let's move on to something a little sadder, I guess, kind of the end of an era, you might say. So I got a bunch of information. I looked at a Variety article from Carolyn Giardina. I hope I'm saying that right, Carolyn. And also looked at a Deadline article from Andreas Wiseman for this next one. So Technicolor, which was a VFX company that was founded in 1915. You probably know it from watching little known indie films like The Wizard of Oz and Gone with the Wind. Technicolor's been around for forever. They basically are done. So they sent an email, I believe, or at least alerted their customers and employees back on February 21st that they were facing severe financial challenges. This included sending U.S. employees a warn notice, as required by law for large companies that anticipate closings and mass layoffs. And now they're basically done. So it's kind of a big blow to the VFX community. Obviously, Technicolor is a huge company. It also owns labels like The Mill, MPC, Micros Animation, Technicolor Games. Yeah. So what do you think about this? What were your first thoughts kind of going through all this?
Well, it sounded absolutely terrible. So
Yeah.
it's the communication from management, I think,
Has been awful.
has been
Yeah.
awful. So yes, they sent an email essentially telling
Hmm.
their workers that not only are they not going to be continuing with employment, but many of them were not going to be receiving pay from the previous month. Many of the MPC
Hmm.
employees in the London offices received emails that they would not be compensated for the month of February. This is coming
Yeah.
after an address from CEO Caroline Parot in January saying that the company was poised better than ever, and that they were turning a new leaf, and that they had
Hmm.
found the financing to like keep it all together. So just a total whiplash effect from the messaging. And from
Yeah.
this Variety article, it sounds like the employees turned around and started looting the building. It inspired a small riot as employees either were sobbing emotionally, realizing that they were out of the job, and then people just started grabbing stuff, memorabilia and tokens,
Mhm.
movie posters from the wall, and just started looting the building once they realized that they weren't going to be paid. I mean, just a terrible, terrible scene.
Yeah, the communication, or I guess lack thereof, or just straight up lying, it seems like, about this whole thing is really, really terrible. And I think like what sucks the most about this for me is I feel like over the past few years, I can kind of like pinpoint this actually to when Cats came out in 2019, and there was that kind of whole blow up about like the VFX in that movie, which then kind of steamrolled into like, or snowballed, I should say, into, well, actually, how much time did the actual artists working on this have to do what they needed to do? Who is at fault for this really? It obviously isn't the artist, And I feel like over the past few years, there have just been so many stories coming out around VFX artists being really disrespected, not having enough time to get things done, having to do rush jobs, and then when an audience member sees bad visual effects, they don't think, oh, the company didn't give them enough time to get this done, et cetera, et cetera. They think that person did a bad job. So they're kind of like the first in the line of fire for that sort of thing. And this just kind of feels like a little, another drop in the hat of just that whole story kind of unfolding over the past few years.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I hope in the melee, as people were grabbing hard drives, that someone got the butthole cut of Cats and they will finally release it
Please.
to the public. Release the butthole cut, as I've always said. No, you're absolutely right. So let's talk a little bit about what it's like to be a VFX worker these days. So there's basically, there's about 10 or so major firms. Technicolor being one of them.
Mhm.
It's a French company. In the United States, we have Industrial Light and Magic, which is the largest. Double Negative is probably the biggest VFX house. There's some others that I can't remember the names of. And these are servicing everything from major motion pictures to all sorts of smaller, visual, moving image sort of stuff, advertisements, all the way down the line. Um, and what has happened is that the demand is so high, but the amount of artists that are coming into these buildings has allowed them to consistently depress wages. And so a lot of times artists will end up just hopping between the companies about every few years. I mean, very, very tech behavior kind of stuff is like, engineers will hop between Amazon and Microsoft and Facebook or whatever. And so it kind of follows the same model, but slowly but surely, what has really happened is that a lot of the brunt of the work is being put on employees in underdeveloped markets such as India. And these people are also getting really, not only are they overworked, underpaid, and the whole system is kind of buckling in on itself. But in
Mhm.
this firing, some of the news coming out of Technicolor India, the CEO, Biren Ghosh of the India team, reported that he found out of the dissolution of the company at the same time as everybody else.
Yeah.
Um, it
Mhm.
has the largest single staff office of any Technicolor office in the world. There's over 2,000 employees working out of the India office. All these people were fired at the exact same time. So it's a problematic industry. They're getting criticized for the output because it's not as strong as it
Mhm.
was historically. But I think that really has more to do with sort of the just the over the increased amount of work. I mean, they have a huge amount of
Yeah.
workload. You had a feeling with AI coming in that this was going to be one of the first industries that it would really target. And before AI has really even started to seep into the VFX workflow, I am surprised that we are watching one of the major players implode like this. I'm kind of curious if some of these subsidiaries that they bought, I mean, Moving Picture Company, MPC, they only
Mhm.
purchased in 2022. I wonder if
Mhm.
there's an opportunity where maybe that could be sold off, like or
Yeah,
I'm
I
not really
believe they
sure.
still have some projects kind of in the works, no? Like they were working on I know they were working on Snow White, which that's hopefully that's done because I'm seeing it next week. So,
Yeah,
but
looking great, looking great.
yeah. And I believe the newest Mission Impossible movie was also sort of in their
Oh, so you must
wheelhouse.
be
So
terrified.
they've, I don't know what's going to happen, but I trust Tom Cruise to get shit done if I trust him to do anything. But so I don't know. I don't really know what's going to happen with those projects that were sort of still in the hamper, so to say.
Yeah, some of the
Yeah.
chatter over on Reddit was that a lot of the artists that were laid off are already being snatched up by the competitors.
Sure. Okay.
The people who are heavily in demand, as far as experience levels, have opportunities at other companies because other companies are going to absorb an ever growing workload. So it's not like
Hmm.
it's not like this industry is in structural decline from just in general or from AI yet, although that could certainly be on the horizon. This could be a sort of canary in the coal mine. You know, it could be that they weren't able to secure additional financing to shore up their business because no one wanted to take the risk on an industry that is so ripe for disruption. So
Yeah.
I don't know, but my heart definitely goes out to all the VFX artists out there who have lost their job, the support staff that have lost their job, all the folks over in India who are doing a huge amount of the work for our movies and who are never getting
Hmm.
credited. Their names don't appear in the final credits. So, um, yeah, it's unfortunate, but I think that overall, this is a case of mismanagement and the inability of legacy companies to maintain visionary leadership and to steward companies into through the disrupting headwinds of the 21st century.
Yeah. And this is kind of off topic, but I mean, it is crazy, wild how long they've been around. Like Technicolor has been around long enough that like when people say something's in Technicolor, they just mean it's colorful. Like it's become like a stand-in for just being very bright and vibrant, which I mean, wild stuff. Also, I believe the first movie they did was Snow White, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, really?
And now that's sort of finishing. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure that's correct. And now finishing that loop.
Full circle.
Full circle. All right. Let's move on to our next. If my computer unfreezes, to our next news item this week. So this is going to be a bit of a long, lengthy explanation. So this has to do with Anora and sort of the kind of working conditions. Well, that's what it started out as having to do with, and now we're going to talk about something else that has to do with it. But to give a little context for what's going on, so I believe this sort of surfaced almost like immediately after Anora won Best Picture, but it's from an Instagram account called Crewstories. And basically, the person who runs this account essentially said that they heard from a bunch of crew members who worked on the set of Anora. They made a lot of allegations that after the crew basically petitioned to get an IATSE contract. So when the production started off, it was a non-union job. Anora did have a SAG and a DGA contract, but not an IATSE contract. And IATSE represents crew members. And when some crew members, I guess, felt a little mistreated because of kind of the non-union aspect of it and that they weren't receiving union wages, weren't receiving benefits such as healthcare, they decided to unionize, and that reportedly made Baker unhappy. So that's sort of the first initial kind of allegation that came out of this Instagram post. Since then, and I guess before I go into that, we should say, I believe the only thing we can kind of really confirm really at this point is that Anora did receive an IATSE contract kind of in the middle, maybe towards the back half
No,
of production.
the last
Yeah,
2 to 3
yeah.
days.
So IATSE tweeted about that when it happened. So that is like something that is verifiable. A lot of the specific accusations are alleged at this point. And a couple of crew members, a few crew members since kind of this initial Instagram post came out, have come out and said, this is not true. This is not what I experienced. And kind of discussed that in their view, the flip to a union contract was pretty unremarkable. Like the original post obviously has some people accusing Baker of being kind of nasty when that flip happened. And then other crew members are like, well, no, he wasn't at all. It was a pretty standard flip, pretty standard stuff. So I wanted to sort of give all those caveats. And I guess before we kind of jump into this, say that the only thing that I think is like really verifiable here is that it did flip at some point. Like there is kind of a paper trail for that, I guess. Different people on a crew can have different experiences, different aims, et cetera, et cetera. And I think with all the conflicting reports, we sort of wanted to kind of make this a discussion about how social media kind of takes a story and runs with it, and maybe like shed some of the nuance from that story, because the original post has been shared in a lot of places. Um, and that post has started sort of a larger conversation, but that larger conversation is kind of like hidden within the comments, hidden within kind of smaller Reddit posts. So, kind of the layman on social media will perhaps see that post and, like, honestly, like, this is what I did before I started looking into it. See that post, kind of go, oh, that sucks, and then kind of skip on by and not maybe look into sort of the broader conversation about what's happening, which is how social media works. And that's no fun. But yeah, what are you, I know some of your thoughts on this, but how do you feel about sort of, I guess, the social mediafication of how we discuss these things?
The social medification. Uh,
Mediafication.
It does feel like meatification, Sammy. This is. I thought it was disgusting, to be honest with you. From the second that the original post came out, I mean, the first thing that really stunk to me was that this is a post that came out the day after the Oscars, after the one of the
Mm-hmm.
most nastiest, most mudslingy Oscar campaigns of recent memory. This post comes out after the Oscars from an anonymous poster. I mean, we're into film QAnon territory here, and it just smelled like bullshit to me from the start, or certainly a high degree of bullshit within it. If anybody was sitting on this information, they could have profited from selling it to a rival campaign. This would have and most likely could have been dredged up during the campaign, but that would have exposed it to a high degree of media scrutiny that I'm not sure it would have held up to. So to watch it leak out like this on Crewstories, which is an Instagram account that we have talked about on this show and that we have praised on this show, uh, I was, I was surprised about, although, it's not a super old Instagram account. So, I guess we're sort of learning a little bit about, just how things work over there, which I found disappointing.
I don't want to necessarily like pin all the blame sort of on Crewstories, mostly because like, the way they talk about like, I talked to a bunch of crew members, I talked to a bunch of people who had stories to tell. And like being someone who talks to a bunch of people who, share like things that happen to them in their experience, I completely understand how you would be like, well, this from this person's perspective sucks and I want to share it. At the same time, like Crewstories isn't, this is kind of like one of my kind of real digging points with like the way social media works in news at this point is like Crewstories isn't a journalist. Like, he or she, they, I'm not sure who runs the account, but like they are sharing what they have received from people who say that they worked on this production and this is their experience. And again, different crew members can have different experiences. And I don't think Crewstories has ever really pushed themselves as a journalist. They are simply like sharing information that comes to them and trying to like share and be an advocate for this sort of thing. In this particular instance, that opens up a larger conversation and all these other different voices, other crew members who had different experiences, crew members who can provide a little more context or whatever it might be, that comes into light. And I think the problem is that aspect, and I don't think this is Crewstories' fault, this is just the way social media works fault, is that those extra conversations aren't what's coming to light. It's just the original post that kind of keeps getting shared around and shared around. And perhaps they could like jump back into the conversation. I don't know. It's also a weird thing when people tell you things in confidence or like anonymously, like how much you can share about like, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They don't want people to stop sharing stories with them. But so in my view, this is not like really something we can like pin on one person. They did what they thought was sort of best. Hopefully, if I'm looking at it as a sort of like giving kind of an, I don't know if the word is altruistic, but kind of a optimistic look at, I guess. They did what they thought was best and tried to like share stories that were told to them. And now the conversation has sort of snowballed and, other crew members again are sharing their experiences too. And it's hard to sort of pinpoint like what exactly happened
Well,
besides that there was a flip halfway or not halfway through, but at some point during the production.
I hear you. However, I do have to push back a little bit that, like, so Crewstories as a curator of this and as a
Mhm.
publisher of something that they know is highly charged, is getting high engagement, having huge share numbers across social media, I think that they hold a responsibility for being, a curator of that conversation
Mm.
and a curator of that content. And once a lot of pushback starts to filter in, and they give no sort of update. They don't reach out
Mhm.
to anybody else to publish any sort of ulterior stories. That is what really makes me think that, oh, this person has a ideological allegiance to the initial post, and they are therefore not going to alter it. They're going to keep it up. And like you said, like, you have to dig really deep into the comments to find any sort
Mhm.
of contrary voices to that post. And as of right now, the post is still up on the Instagram
Yeah. Yeah.
account. It's still getting high traction because the algorithm will keep putting it into people's feeds that it knows will piss off. And I still see friends and colleagues sharing this story as if it is verifiable truth. And that, I do think, is a problem, and that is something that they have
Mhm.
responsibility for.
Yeah, no, I agree with you there. I would hope I can't remember when this initially was shared. Ooh, I thought I had it, but that is a screenshot I took of one of the comments.
I'm
Do you
pretty
remember
sure,
when the post was initially shared?
I
Like
believe it was shared the morning
March?
after the Oscars.
Okay, so
I
it's
believe it
been
was
about
shared.
a week. So it's been about a week. So like I don't, you know, I like to give people the benefit of the doubt. Maybe there's something, maybe they're like trying to talk to people, or maybe they're like trying to get a bigger, I guess, idea of what went on. But what's interesting, kind of jumping off that, what's interesting to me about this also is that like it hasn't really been picked up anywhere. And that's again, I wonder if it is because there are so many different stories coming out. Like if you look at the comments of that Instagram, you'll see a ton of crew members kind of like on both sides of the aisle, so to speak. And then a bunch of people who are just in the industry kind of like, well, this is how I feel, this is how I feel, this is how
Did
I
you
feel,
see
right?
did you see crew members on the agreeing with the post side of the aisle? Because I only saw people disagreeing with
I
the
saw a
post.
couple. I saw like a couple who didn't get very specific.
But are they verified crew members?
I mean, I don't know, is any, you know what I mean? But that's sort of like what I mean about verifying everything is if you're a journalist and you're like working on a story about this, you would have to verify that like every single person who's commented about it worked on the movie, right? And that can like,
Yeah. I
yeah,
mean,
take some time.
I know the people that commented on the post that said this is not accurate are
Yeah.
verifiably tied. They're on the IMDb
Yeah.
page. Like,
Yes, absolutely. But I'm just saying, like when you scroll through the comments and you get people giving their like different perspectives, if you're kind of speaking going to the fact of like I haven't seen that many like verified publications discuss this yet, I
right.
would hope that they are like that's maybe because like they're trying to do due diligence and this is like something that is like way bigger than just being like, hey, here's what a bunch of people told me, I guess. Or even us being like, this is what a bunch of people said on Instagram, right? Like that's not that it takes a lot more digging to like actually get to the truth of something.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think
Yeah.
I think we will, I say with 99.9% certainty, we will never get to exactly the truth of
Sure.
what
We'll never
happened
know.
on this
Yeah.
set. What we do know is that, oh my god, the how excited people were to take the golden boy on the a morning after the greatest night of his career, and all of a sudden spin it into, oh my god, this guy is a liar. I have been betrayed. The consistent criticisms that have been about Sean Baker throughout his career was, here's this white man who exploits sex worker stories for his own benefit. That crowd started chirping, and the flip immediately from, here's a guy who is he's an indie film lifer who goes about his business in the right way, immediately turned to uh, portraying him as some sort of Mr. Burns capitalist lording his $6 million budget upon the poor crew members of New York City. And I just find that sort of that kind of it's just shocking how quick, the second you it's tall poppy syndrome, right? The second your head gets above the fray, people are so eager to chop it off.
Yeah, I don't know if I find it shocking. And like I have no comment on Sean Baker as a person. I interviewed him once. It was a lovely conversation. He makes movies that I really like. I have really no comment to make about his personal life or him as a person, but I'm not really shocked that like if you think about, I mean, there's always that crowd that sort of comes out when anyone is accused of something bad, whether that accusation is verifiable or not, who is like, oh, well, I never liked them. And like,
Yeah.
I have never really liked that as like trying to, it's like you're trying to make, like, it's like, a good example of it is like, I'm trying to think of a good one. Like this is way darker and way more serious, but
I'm so
when
excited.
when the Kevin Spacey allegations came out, and people pop out of the woodwork were like, "Oh well, I never liked him anyway. Always thought he was a bad actor," and I'm like, "Oh, it's like." Sort of like making them feel like they're better because they could always see through the bullshit or whatever it is. And I'm like, well, that's just A, probably not true. And B, like that doesn't make anyone else a worse person because they thought a Kevin Spacey performance was good. Like, you know what I mean? It's like it all kind of sucks. But I'm not shocked that that is sort of that aspect of this also happened, I guess, because it's been happening for so long.
Yeah, and of course
Yeah.
I shouldn't be. I mean, I'm experiencing this on, the sort of social media, like the way that social media can take a story and then specifically
Hmm.
target it to people algorithmically that it knows will hate whatever it is that you're talking about. Like I experienced this, so I mean, I
Hmm.
and I get this. I just, oh my god, can like. I so wish that this was not part of our discourse, and I do wish that people that like haven't we learned by now to like take a breath and like wait
Yeah.
for the facts
Wait and
to trickle out as opposed
yeah.
to jumping at every anonymous poster that reinforces your ideological
Yeah.
view of the world.
Well, it's also, I mean, these kinds of things, and I mean, for the poster too, like them learning the information, the things where that break out like this are things that are designed to like really trigger an emotional response in you, right? Like
Right.
they're things that are close to home. Like we like people in the industry, everyone knows crew people who have been mistreated. Like it's all stuff that like of course people are going to have like a passionate snap reaction to it, right? Sorry if I just snapped on the microphone.
Oh no, that's fine. You
But
can snap away.
but but and I think it's good that people are passionate about things like this, but I also think we need to make sure we think about these things in a measured way and try to like dig to the bottom. Like do your research, look into stuff, and once you've kind of looked into it and looked at however many, you know, I don't want to say facts, but however many kind of viewpoints you can get and however much detail you can get, then you can have your opinion about it, Just try to look into things. Even if they make you so kind of upset you want to like react immediately, which we all do. That happens all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was very
Hmm.
well said. And as a little bit of inside baseball, me and Sammy have actually we've been texting about this a lot over the last week,
Yeah.
and we actually both have very strong opinions around the original post and sort of the union
Hmm.
issues at play. But ultimately, the reason why we're keeping the conversation to this to what we're talking about, which is like the relationship of celebrity and social media and truth or whatever, is because we have dug into this to the best of our independent
Yeah.
journalistic ability, and this is all we know for sure. Um,
Yeah.
Everything
Any
beyond this,
conversation we had about like crew members' experience on Anora would be kind of speculation. So,
exactly, and
yeah.
we will have our union debates and sort of union indie film relationship debates another time. I guarantee there
Hmm.
will be a perfect opportunity for it. But the reason why we are sticking to this talking point is because this is all we know. I would like
Yeah.
to throw one last little thing because I did see this very consistently, which is people posting in response to this. Oh my god, did you hear that Neon ran an $18 million Oscar campaign for this movie and they couldn't pay for their crew? Which is, please, guys, this is not how film financing works. The film
Yeah.
was done. You make the film, you have no idea if it's going to be good or not. At that point, Neon, the distributor, comes in. They test the film over and over again. They determine if it's even possible to run an Oscar campaign or a Palme d'Or campaign or like any of these other campaigns. And they're the ones who make the investment literally a year after the production has
Yeah.
ceased and everyone has gone home. I'm sorry, but the two things are completely unrelated. And when you bring up
Sure.
that point, you sound like an idiot.
Yeah. I mean, marketing campaign. Marketing campaign price tags are fascinating to me, but that's a whole other separate topic.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
that'll be a fun conversation to have one day.
Sure, let's do it.
But because I just, all right. Speaking of unions, this is also kind of sad. Sesame Street. So this is from an NPR article. Before I get into the details of it, this is an NPR article from Elizabeth Blair. So Sesame Workshop, which is the nonprofit behind Sesame Street. Oh my God, NPR has all the ads too. The nonprofit behind Sesame Street will downsize significantly with layoffs. I'm having a really hard time speaking today. I significantly apologize. But so this was shared by President and CEO Sherry Rollins Weston in a note to staff. The layoffs come 2 months after Max said it would stop distributing Sesame Street episodes after 2025, and within a day after more than 200 of Sesame Street Workshop employees asked for Sesame Street Workshop to recognize that they want to form a union. So just to differentiate a little bit, so cast like puppeteers, the crew, the writers on Sesame Street, they are already unionized. These are people who work at the nonprofit Sesame Street Workshop. So just a little point of clarification. But you have a small child. I think we've talked this before. Is she talked about this before maybe. Is she into Sesame Street? Have you like dove into the Sesame Street archives? Do you watch it?
Sammy, Elmo was my number one artist on my Spotify Wrapped this
Oh,
past year. So
yes.
yes,
What a
we
talent.
are a Sesame Street household. Yeah, my daughter loves Sesame Street. This is terrible,
hmm
terrible news. I mean, there's been kind of bad
Yeah.
news coming out of Sesame Street for a while now. Um,
hmm
very, very sad. So Max announced that they were not going to renew the 10-year contract that they signed in 2015 when Sesame Street moved to Max for their first run, like their it's not exactly the same thing, but their tier one window distribution, and then the episodes would go to PBS for free later. The reason why they did
hmm
this is because Sesame Street used to be able to finance its production and then its free distribution through PBS with, I mean, not they, it wasn't totally for free, but they were getting a small licensing fee from PBS. But they were able to do
hmm
that because of their massive DVD, VHS, and merchandising sales, and that was what was able to keep the business going. Now, as we know, the home video industry was once 4 times larger than the Hollywood box office. It has all gone away. That is why in
hmm
2015, Sesame Street, and actually like a pretty forward-thinking move, jumped into this relationship with Max, which was releasing its new streaming service, and that funded Sesame Street for the next 10 years. Max, under the leadership of David Zaslav, is cutting programs left and right. They're streamlining their programming, and they just don't have room for Sesame Street. And also, Sesame Street is now facing a larger competition than it did before. You've got, Bluey is eating into sort of that demographic. You got the Coco Melon, like the baby crack kind of stuff, which is like all over the place. And of course, you have the UCG stuff, which is coming in and taking its lunch as well, namely through Miss Rachel and Blippy
hmm
and these types of people. So that's how we got into the situation. Max announced months ago that they were going to be cutting Sesame Street. Sesame Street then had an outside consultant come in, reformat the show for their upcoming 56th season or whatever season
Something like
they're on.
that.
Sorry, I
Yeah.
can't remember the exact season number. So they're reformatting the show. They're changing up the sequencing. They're basically like trying to make it look a little bit more like Bluey, like in terms of sort of
Mm.
narrative arcs. So there's big changes. And only at that point did the non-cast members of Sesame Workshop come in. And this is like, these are the early childhood specialists. These
Yeah.
are the
Mhm.
accountants. These are the support staff, and they have voted to join the OPEIU Local 153, which is basically a nonprofit employee union. Um, and I feel for these people. I think that they absolutely should be a part of a union and have that union support. But unfortunately, the timing is
Mhm.
absolutely terrible. They are, I mean,
Yeah.
they are squeezing blood from a stone here, and I don't know what they expected.
Yeah, I know. I feel like I don't, because they announced the layoffs the day after they kind of announced that they would like to unionize, and I think they it said they had over 200 people, so, like, I assume that didn't happen overnight, so, there's probably a lot of organizing going on, and I don't wanna discount how long that can take. But it does feel like I really feel for people because it feels like sort of a like, what else do we have left? Like, let's just try this. Like, like let's maybe this will work by like some miracle or something like that. But it all just really sucks. I feel really hard for these people.
It comes into like we don't know what's going on in the
Yeah.
offices,
Yeah.
but I do think comes into a broader conversation, which is that in ideally a union and management should have some sort of relationship together,
Hmm.
some sort of understanding. So the fact that they came out and made this union announcement at this particular moment in time when Sesame Street doesn't have uh, any money coming in for the next year.
You're saying this, and this has just popped into my head. I almost wonder because obviously, like, this is the major draw of this NPR article starts off with like this the layoffs were announced a day after they, made their intent to unionize clear. Part of me wonders, speculation, if it's like sort of a PR tactic, like let's go ahead and announce anyway if they're going to announce these. I don't
Well,
know, but I have no idea.
that's what gears me to think that maybe there was already an adversarial relationship with management that was
Yeah.
maybe saying,
Hmm.
"Hey, you're jeopardizing you guys unionizing and basically like forcing us to pay into some sort of whatever benefit fund that the union is asking for.
Hmm.
That's jeopardizing our sale to another streamer, another network.
Mm,
That's making it harder. So it does make me think that they are playing hardball and they are playing PR hardball. Um,
yeah.
Obviously, this would not be the ideal. I would think that from a purely logical perspective, you would wait to make this demand until you have the next deal secured in place. Um, but with the way it seems to be going, that I would think that there was already an adversarial relationship
Yeah.
at play. Although I can't say that I really feel or that I really fault the leadership at Sesame Workshop, because you're going to ask for a union when we have no money. What do you expect us to do? I mean,
No, I get that, but that's why that kind of makes me feel like something else is sort of going on that maybe we're not privy to, like you sort of mentioned, just because the timing is like a little strange. But
yeah.
I don't know. The whole thing really kind of a bummer, honestly.
Well, regardless what happens
Yeah.
with these support staffers, that are asking to join this union, I am really on the edge of my seat as far as what's going to happen with Sesame Workshops. I mean, here we have another
Hmm.
legacy company that has pretty deftly survived the changing times and changing
Yeah.
early childhood learning styles, and their core mission and sort of their core product is still really compelling to an audience. So I really hope that they find a home. I'm anxious to find out who is going to
Hmm.
pick them up. Will somebody pick them up? Will somebody float this bill? I think that the world is better for having Sesame Street in it. It's still a great product for all the people out there who don't have 3-year-olds. Sesame Street is still awesome. It's
I was
still
about to say, I think part of why it rocks is it's compelling to kids and adults, right? So, like, you get to watch something with your kid that you're sort of like, this is
I,
nice.
I wouldn't call it compelling to adults, but
Maybe not
but
nice, good to watch,
it's nice.
fun.
It's it it's they still are using evidence-based early childhood learning strategies in the procurement of the show. So your
Mhm.
kid look, there's much larger discussions around screen time and introduction of screen
Sure.
time, and certainly with our daughter, we have tried as much as we can to sort of withhold screen time and be very controlling about, very intentional, I should say, about
Mhm.
what screens our daughter gets exposed to. And it all started with Sesame Street, all downhill from there. No, but we all started with Sesame Street, and I still feel confident that watching Sesame Street delivers more value educationally to a 3-year-old than a lot of the other shows out there. So
Mhm.
I would really like to see it survive, and I think that it still has a place in America in 2025.
Yeah, I do too. All right. This next one's a fun one. I think this will be fun. Um, but moving on, Ezra Edelman has been popping off in the media, and I'm kind of living
Yes,
for it. It's pretty
go
fun.
off, go
Go off,
off.
King. um, if you don't know who Ezra Edelman is, he directed OJ Made in America, I believe back in 2016. So kind of documentary filmmaker focused on sort of, big cultural figures in America, in American culture, I should say. And in this Indiewire interview, or this Indiewire, not interview, Indiewire article from Samantha Bergeson, she basically talks about how he's speaking out against the quote reign of a state proved and in his opinion therefore sanitized celebrity documentaries end quote. So basically Edelman was in the midst of making a 9-hour docu-series about Prince. We all know who Prince is. And then that sort of fizzled out amid disputes with the late musician's estate. So that was going to be for Netflix. But now it looks like Netflix is working on a different documentary in conjunction with the Prince estate. And Ezra Edelman's popping off. He's mad. And I'm mad for him because he's totally right. I was thinking about this while I was reading this article. I think about this all the time within documentaries about famous people and also within like just profiles about famous people. Everything has become so sanitized because we're just like not willing to say anything. And in some respects, I'm like, it is good to think about like what is crossing a line and what is actually journalism because have read some older kind of celebrity profiles where I'm like, well, I would absolutely never say that about anyone, even if I thought they were an asshole. But this sort of sanitization of just like the way we treat celebrities and cultural figures in particular, I think is really, really bad for journalism, just in sort of general terms.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's across the board. I mean, it happens in
Mm-hmm.
journalism too. I mean, for 15 years, even like our most esteemed journalistic outlets have been writing favorable stories in exchange for sources, even from some of the most nefarious, secretive parts of the government, secretive parts of big business, and they trade this access in terms of it for favorable coverage. And
Mm-hmm.
journalists and filmmakers and studios are so beholden on their source material, and because no independent artist can possibly fund and fight a lawsuit on their own, they need the backing of a corporation. There's no incentive structure for anybody to defend the truth. And Ezra Edelman's absolutely right. He got fucked in this. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
straight up. He got fucked by the Prince estate, which there's been a war going on in the Prince estate ever since he died in 2016. The party that was in charge gave Edelman permission to begin this documentary. It took 5 years. There was also a completely different leadership team in Netflix at the time. Since both parties have flipped, another group has come to control the Prince estate, denied this, and Adam Del Dio has taken over documentaries at Netflix with an express mission of, "Oh, let's just have fun, y'all. Like, look, we don't want anything like too challenging. Let's just have fun, right? Right, guys?"
Mm-hmm.
And so he got totally screwed. This is 5 years of his life,
Yeah.
countless hours of work, all to be ripped from his hands at the 1 yard line. Oh my God, do I feel for this artist? What he must be going through, I can't even imagine. It is, it is so painful, and it is so indicative
Mm-hmm.
of how we went from the golden age of documentary, 10 years ago, to like everything from I don't know, the Jinx to the Act of
Mm-hmm.
Killing, what I think is the greatest documentary ever made.
That's a good,
Um,
yeah.
Navalny, some really uh, uh, really incredible journalistic work exposing the truth and corruption of the world. And I mean, I hate to throw it at the feet of the goat, but starting with The Last Dance, it's just been downhill.
And the thing with the Last Dance is like I totally get what you mean, but you don't think about it that way at first because it's so goddamn compelling cuz Michael Jordan is just like a funny person to watch. You know what I mean? Like he can't help but be like good TV.
Of course.
But like I was thinking about the Sly Stallone documentary a lot while I was like kind of going through all this, which came out a few years ago and is sort of kind of a similar deal. It's not as good as The Last Dance, but a similar deal where you're like, well, this guy is a compelling guy. I like watching him. It's you can kind of read between the lines of what he's saying and what might be the truth. But the documentary itself, which is executive produced by Sylvester Stallone, has like no real interest in sort of digging into him in any real meaningful way. So it's just like, did you have a good time watching the doc? Yeah, sure, of course I did, but I don't know if I actually like learned anything that compelling or
Yeah.
interesting or new about this artist
Do
or
you
person.
remember anything about it? Did you have come into any contact with a semblance of humanity, or were you served, essentially
You
just
know what's
slop?
funny about it? What's funny about it, and I'm so sorry to Sylvester Stallone, the most memorable part about it is the Arnold Schwarzenegger talking head moments. Like, he's just like, he's really funny. And every time Arnold talks, Arnold, it's just like, you can't help but kind of smile. And it's kind of funny that he's the thing I remember most about the Sylvester Stallone documentary, but there you have it.
Yeah, I
But,
mean, it's unfortunate, but like all these things are also operating within the exact same environment that we just talked about, for 30 minutes about the Sean Baker thing,
mm-hmm.
which is everything is
Yeah.
either all good or all bad. There's no room for human nuance. We're supposed to live in a connected, internet world, and yet we all can't stand to even look at each other. We can't stand to look at each other's our problems, our shortcomings, our infallibilities. um
Mm-hmm.
it, it, it it's really really upsetting to me, and then it comes at a great expense because now all of a sudden we believe in a political leadership that is presenting the same sort of cardboard cutout image of itself. um we are so steeped in propaganda and advertising, um
Mm-hmm.
to a degree that no civilization has ever been in history, and these documentaries, so quote unquote documentaries, are just part of the problem.
Yeah. I want to bring up just I haven't actually watched this documentary, but I'm pretty excited to, and Cameron watched it maybe a few months ago, sometime late last year, and he quite enjoyed it. But the Martha Stewart documentary is also on Netflix, which I find kind of interesting. And she I don't think she was really involved in that documentary at all besides her interviews because she had some like pretty scalding remarks about it after it came out. And I'm sort of like, that's what I want. Like I want, you know, it, it didn't like ruin Martha Stewart's career, and there's not like too much in there, I guess. That's like that hot takey, but I just liked that she wasn't really involved, at least in sort of the editorial process, and has some shit to say about it afterwards. Like that's kind of what I want. Like I want like kind of that like tension. And I was talking to Cameron about it. He was like, you can kind of feel that tension in the interviews because just in like the way they sort of question her, what they push on, what they don't, et cetera, et cetera. So
Yeah,
I have to check
that's
that
really
out. But
that's
yeah,
really interesting. I also wouldn't put it past that Martha having, cut her teeth in a far more kind of competitive and like just a little bit more vicious media
yeah,
world actually
mm-hmm.
understands the value in that tension,
Maybe, yeah,
and possibly sort of leaned in. The other thing that I was like really thinking about this is that it further stratifies society and storytelling, because these ultra wealthy people that so many documentaries are made about have the means to silence and stifle artists, namely through lawsuits. So the only
mm-hmm.
people that you can safely make documentary content about are the same people from usually the same socioeconomic class as the artist that's making the documentary, aka not rich, because shocker, most documentarians don't make shit in terms of money. They make beautiful
mm-hmm.
art, but they don't make fucking money. Um, and so you end up with like the only people that we can be honest about are poor people, because they're the ones who don't have the means to threaten the distribution model. And that.
And then, like, kind of at the same point, you could kind of say whatever that, like, gives you more license to, like, maybe not be honest as well about them. Like,
Sure.
you know what I mean? Yeah. Oof.
Sure.
That's
So
kind of distressing.
it creates a really perverse incentive structure. Now, on the other hand, maybe there could be something beautiful about that. Maybe America wakes up to the value of kitchen sink storytelling. We begin to turn a lens back to the 50% of this country that, lives just barely around the poverty line, that makes up the vast majority of this country. We're no longer looking towards the billionaire class for all of our meaning and interest and compelling stories in the world. But most likely is what you said, and it'll just be, poor people will just get, completely ground down into the dirt through propaganda.
Yeah, it's not good. I was also thinking, because I was thinking about the Jeremy Strong profile, which we talked about like 2 weeks ago, but I
Yeah.
was thinking about it a lot because I think it's a really great profile. And like, you know, part of what comes up in the IndieWire article with Ezra Edelman, that kind of the Prince estate, I guess, kind of allegedly was pushing back against, or he has some, abuse allegations against him in his past, Prince does. And I don't think anything in this Jeremy Strong profile was quite that intense. And yet, Jeremy Strong stands kind of lost their minds over this like characterization of him as like maybe slightly too serious instead of like enjoying that sort of like probe into him as an actor, him as an artist. And that I think is a problem too. That's not just like a propaganda machine, but that's just like everyone's so concerned about like upsetting anybody with, whatever they might say about an artist or a famous person or whoever it might be.
Yeah. Yeah. Unless it's
Mm-hmm.
just a glowing facsimile representation that you can encounter for 2 seconds as you scroll your feed, anything else that makes you think too deeply about it is problematic. And I would like to say for the record, because I think I said last week that I thought Jeremy Strong would be a bad hang, and I probably stand by that, but I fucking love Jeremy Strong. I loved that profile. It made me love him all
It
the
made me love him
more.
so much.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because he cares, and he cares so desperately, and
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
that is something that I relate to very deeply. I saw myself in him, and it made me love him more, and it made me love the fact that he embraces those little foibles of his character,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of has fun with them on a public stage. Yeah.
Jeremy, if you'd like to test our good hang theory, good hang, bad hang theory, we're open. Come hang
Oh,
out.
come
Let's
on
go.
down, Jeremy. Jeremy, please, crash Zoom, crashzoompod at
Please.
gmail.com.
Please.
Crashzoompod at gmail.com.
We'd
We
love
love you.
to.
We really do. We love you in like a non-propagandistic way. We love you as a person.
Yes. We love you. We love you as an autiste. All right. I think that's all we got this week. Good up. That was fun.
Yeah, nice. We were able to. We
Yeah.
found some juice. We brought that juice.
We found some juice.
No
we went from
fruits,
tired
only juice.
to juiced up. I did misspeak quite a few times or mess up some words, but what else is new?
Sammie's signature. Although you didn't mention challengers once, which was very strange. So
You just did.
I did. Hey, listen, if I can bring it up, I can keep a challengers count going. But anyway, guys, if you enjoyed our juice on this episode, please like, subscribe, rate, and review. Hit us with the 5 stars. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, on YouTube, if that's where you like to listen. Those little comments, those little ratings really, really do a great job in helping spread this show, which we are still growing. We are still in our infancy. As always, you can email us, crashzoompod@gmail.com. You can follow us on Instagram and TikTok, crashzoompodcast. And until next week, Sammie, I will talk to you.
I'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.